is Birthing Stories Part 2. All right, so it's time for my depressing birthing story. I didn't even want to do this. I've been fighting it for 3 weeks because it is just horrible. It is not the fairy tale birthing story that you wish to have as a mother. You watch the different things online. I was a YouTuber. I was watching everything. I was preparing myself. I was reading what to expect when you're expecting. I was just all pumped and I had it all planned out in my head.
She's a planner.
Yeah, planner. Definitely a planner. So I was like planned out in my head. Me and Corey, we took birthing classes together. I mean, we were in this thing. We were just looking forward to that special day. Well, I previously to getting pregnant was told that I had multiple cysts, and my regular gynecologist told me that I should consider getting a hysterectomy because I had so many cysts on inside the tissues, outside the tissues, that I wouldn't be able to carry a baby full term, and that my pregnancy at some point would be terminated through, because I couldn't handle the growth of the baby within, the womb. So I was already like leery on edge. I was already feeling trapped through the pregnancy process because I wanted to plan it out again, and I just popped up pregnant one day, but that's a whole nother video. So I was just kind of nervous about the whole thing, and I felt like, oh my gosh, I was on edge. I was taking my prenatal pills, I was trying to follow everything to a T, but I was getting sick my whole pregnancy. I was throwing up. I couldn't keep anything down. I was worrying. I was like so scared. And talking to some of my girlfriends, it's similar to people that have had like a miscarriage before and then try to get pregnant, that like anxious feeling you feel the whole pregnancy, like something's gonna go wrong. Oh my gosh. So that's kind of how I felt. So I chose a doctor's office that had a panel of doctors. The main doctor that I was seeing was a high-risk doctor. I told her about my concerns, what my gynecologist said. She said, we can work through this. Our doctors are really good. She was like, see different doctors every time you have an appointment so you can get used to them and kind of hear what's, their feedback about how you're progressing and everything. So that's what I did. I saw about, I would say, 8 different doctors. I never was able to see the midwife like Stacy, but I took that step to do that. So I was 41 weeks. Again, 40 weeks is when they want you to go into active labor by yourself. So they were already talking about inducing me. When I had my final ultrasound, they made me do a stress test to see how the baby was inside, and once I did the stress test, they said that everything was fine. The baby checked out, and everything was good. So that's Elena. That is Elena.
That's Elena.
So I was just kind of at a loss for words at that point, because I'm like, why are they having me do a strep test? They had me do the glucose test. They had me do all these tests. They had me do all these tests, and I'm like, why am I doing all this testing? So when I go out, they're like, customary, go ahead and make your appointment for the next time you come in, blah, blah, blah. So I go to the front desk, and they're like, oh, you need to go to the side office over here. So when I go to the office, the lady's like, oh, we're here to schedule your surgery. And I'm like, surgery? No, wait, I'm on natural. I'm gonna just have my baby naturally. I'm just choosing the date. They told me to come like pre-schedule or something. And I'm like, based on for my induction. So I'm like, no surgery. I'm just gonna be getting induced, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh yeah, just induced. Okay. Let me write your stuff down. So I was already like feeling like kind of like, oh, okay, I don't really trust this. So in the back of my mind, I was like, do not go in on that induction day. Do not go in on that induction day. So comes the induction day. I had called my mom, called Stacy, called my other sister Shonda, kind of talking through like, hey, this is what the doctor said. You know, I think they're trying to scam me. Like, I was like adamant that I did not want to go in. But my mom was like, well, they said, like, if you don't go in, your baby could be stillborn. And since you've already had the high risk and your gynecologist was already telling you this, like, it was like weighing on me, like, oh, what if I do try to wait and push it and then all of a sudden I don't have a baby at all? So I was like, okay, I'll go in and get induced. So I just gave into it. I went in. I didn't tell anybody. It was just me and my husband. And we went in and we got there. We filled out some paperwork. Of course, they want their money. So bring your credit card or your debit card.
Bring your copay.
Or bring your checkbook, because they will collect before you can even go to the back of the center. So they have us wait for a room. We go back there. We get all settled in. We put our stuff where we wanted. I get in the bed. They unrobe. They tell you to unrobe and all that. They hook me up to all the machines, and then the nurse comes in and says, "Oh, we're ready to check you." She took her fingers. She went up in there. She did her thing, and she said, "Oh, okay." She was like, "You're not dilated at all," and I'm like, "Oh." I'm like, "Dang it! I really wanted to be dilated. I really wanted to have something." I was asking her, "Can you feel mucus plug?" Like, I wanted to know like how far along I was. And she was like, "No, you're not dilated." I'm like, "Okay." So when by the time the night progressed, you know, nurses keep coming in there every so often checking you or whatever. They had told me I had progressed up to 3 centimeters, maybe 4. So I was like, "Oh, okay." You know, they did the meso pill. It was working. It was coming rapid. I was walking around the center, even though I didn't want to.
She didn't know.
I was walking around the center, and I was holding my stomach because it was like literally something was punching the front end of my stomach, like where my pelvic was, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I was just holding my stomach, like, oh, I can't even get through this walk down the corridor. I was like shaking. I'm like, man,
get to the
wrong.
Christmas tree, Tasha. Just get to the Christmas tree.
So I went there and I came back. By this time, my mom had showed up, my dad had showed up, Stacy had got off work, she popped over, and so I was sitting there, and then I was like, oh, I gotta use the bathroom. So I went in the bathroom, nothing came out. I went back in the bed, I sat in the bed, and then I was like, oh, I gotta go to the bathroom again. And I went in the bathroom, and then when I was coming out, Stacy's like, oh, I think her mucus plug and some water came out. And I was like, what?
Her water broke.
She was like, I think your water broke. And I'm like, oh my God, water broke. I'm like, oh yes, it's game time.
She's like, no, it's not. She's
I was like, no, it's not.
I just peed. And I looked at Corey, I was like,
So Stacy took the lead, called the nurse in. They did like a test sample.
They did a strip. So what they did is she peed in the little basin in the toilet. So then the lady took the strip to test whether it was amniotic fluid or not, the strips. And then she determined that it was.
So it was. So I was like, oh my God, I can't believe the water broke. It didn't feel like the videos was saying gushing, and it just felt like I peed. So everything that's happening, I'm trying to compare it to what I already like, okay, did I hear about that? Like, you know, in my head. So I lay down, and my good friend from church called because she's an anesthesiologist. She called and was like, hey, my girl's in there, and, you know, take care of my girl. So I got my epidural fairly quickly. They did the epidural. I was very still. They tell you to roll your shoulders up. You're very still. I'm leaning over on a pillow. They put it in. I'm just waiting. I'm like completely zen, completely calm, because I do not want to like mess up this. Like, this is something I really like don't want to mess up. So after they do that, I thought I asked for the walking one, like I read in the books, but apparently they gave me the full thing. So when I got the full thing, I could no longer walk around the hospital and stuff like that. I guess the walking one is like a semi epidural, so that you can still move your legs. Well, I can't utilize my legs. So again, they were flipping me. I had a couple of nurses that were on it. I had one lady that left me in the queen position for about like 45 minutes to an hour, which I found out you're not supposed to stay in one position that long. You're always supposed to change like constantly every 15 minutes. So that's something I took forward in Stacy's pregnancy, that I was able to, like, after I went through my birthing story, I was able to say, hey, this is what they should have been doing based on what they did. And that's the takeaway from my story, is you want to go into it with as much education as possible. It's great to talk to other mothers to see what happened during theirs, because sometimes, like Stacy had the balloon, they didn't do that with me. They didn't even talk about a balloon. That's something that is good for, like, if you have a doula. That's why some people are now moving towards having a doula, because of the fact that they're that extra person that's like, wait a minute, the nurses are supposed to be doing that, they're supposed to be bringing you this, they're supposed to be moving you, you know, they're keeping on top of that stuff because they have that educational background on what the pregnancy is supposed to be. There's so many different aspects of it. No pregnancy is the same. So it's good to have someone that's well versed in all the tools that you can use in your pregnancy. And that's one thing that I, looking back, even though I had looked at all these videos and all this education, I didn't know everything. So once they came in, basically they went in there and they said that my main doctor came from my practice came. He did a check on me, and he said, you're barely a fingertip. And I'm like, barely a fingertip? Wait a minute. She told me I was 3 centimeters, almost 4. I got the epidural, so I was thinking I was like halfway there, because it's only 10 centimeters. So I was thinking, okay, a centimeter an hour. By the time he got there, I was like, I was gonna be like 6 or 7 centimeters. But he said I was barely a fingertip, and I'm like, what? I'm like, how? I'm like, you need to go back in there. I was like, you need to go get the other nurse, because she told me this, whatever. So he walks out, he goes talks to the other nurse, and he comes back in with her, and he was like, show me how she's 4 centimeters or whatever. So she looks down there, and she's like, oh, you closed back up. And he was like, have you had any surgeries to your cervix? Now, mind you, I've already filled out the papers to tell you I ain't had no surgeries, I ain't had no other pregnancies, I ain't had no, all these 100 billion questions that you got right now is on my previous paperwork. So I'm like, no, I haven't. I was like, you know, I haven't had anything, you know, anything at all. So they go back and they go back, they meet outside, and they come back in, and he was like, I don't want anybody else touching her. I don't want anybody else touching her, only me. And so the nurses were looking, and then one of the nurses was like, I'm a main nurse here in the hospital. She was like, if I have to check her, I'm gonna check her. So they're arguing. So I'm like, what? I'm like, what is going on? Like, what is going on?
Patient here. How are you doing?
Patient right here. Like,
okay.
If y'all want to talk about that
go outside
in a meeting, then y'all do that. But I'm like, what are you doing? So he says, nobody check her, blah, blah, blah. So he walks out, I'm sitting there, I'm looking at Corey, I'm like, oh my God, this is going downhill. So the last nurse that was with me, she started like unplugging the lamp light for the baby thing that's in the room. She started packing up stuff. I'm like, what is she doing? Like, why is she packing up all that stuff? So I said, Corey, I was like, I think they're gonna try to do a C-section. And he was like, no, they're probably just moving it closer to the bed because you're getting ready. You're close. And I'm like, no, I think so. I said, excuse me. She was like, yeah. I was like, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm not getting a C-section. So I don't know if you're trying to move that stuff to have a C-section, but I'm having my baby in here. And she was like, what? No, C-section? Why would you say that? Why would you even say that? No. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm just letting you know so you can go tell the doctor. So she walks out because she's all panicked now because she's trying to save face. So she goes out, they talk to the doctor, and a few moments later, the doctor comes in and he's like, look, I just want to let you know that you're not progressing, and so we're gonna have to move forward with C-section. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna have a C-section. And he was like, you really need to have a C-section because your water is now broke and you're not progressing in labor. Like, nothing's happening, your body's not functioning on its own, and so your baby's running out of time. And I'm like, well, I was like, no, because I was like, I still have 24 hours, and I was like, you know, I'm handling everything good. And then he goes out. So he's like, okay, I'll give you some time. And he walks out. So as he walks out, Corey walks out in the hallway because I was like, I need some ice. So he walks out in the hallway, and the nurse comes back in. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Why are they saying I have a C-section? Did the baby's heart rate drop, or what's going on? She was like, yeah, last night, your baby's heart rate dropped. And I'm like, what? I was like, why didn't anybody tell me? Like, nobody told me anything at all. She was like, oh, I'm not sure why they didn't mention it, but it dropped one time. And I was like, one time? I'm like, but that's not a cause for C-section. I said, because my monitors kept coming off. I think that may have had something to do with it. I was like, well, how am I doing on the Pitocin? Because they come in and they like put on the machine like, ooh, we're going up a level on Pitocin. Ooh, and she was like, oh, you haven't been going up on a level of Pitocin for some time. She was like, it's almost been, because I think this is like day 2. She's like, it's almost been a full 24 hours since they bumped you up. And I was like, well, why didn't they bump me up? She's like, oh, because that blip in the heart rate, they stopped it and they never have restarted it since the nurse shifts. So that's another thing to look out for. When they have those nurse shifts, sometimes they're not all on the same page. So the lady never checked me to bump my Pitocin back into the movement of my labor. She left it. So by her leaving it on that stage, of course my thing's not going to progress. So the doctor came up. So as I'm talking to her, I'm getting flustered. So Corey's out in the hallway, and he said later on, he tells me, oh yeah, the doctor stopped me in the hallway and was like, oh, we don't want to move forward with the C-section while she's like distraught like that. So we're going to wait a couple hours, but you know, you need to talk to her and get her to understand she needs to have a C-section. And he was like, my wife is not going to go for a C-section. So y'all need to try whatever y'all can do, because she's not going to do it. So then he calls the main doctor for the hospital, because that's what they do. Like, they don't tell you this, but if you refuse service 3 times, I think it's 2 or 3 times, they'll call the main doctor and you're basically on your own. So if whatever happens, they're not liable at that point. So they called the main doctor. It was a lady. She came in. She asked me why was I refusing a C-section, and I told her, 1, I didn't know my baby's heart rate dropped, but within this time, her heart rate's been stabilized, been fine. I said, they stopped my Pitocin. They never told me that. I was like, I think they're just trying to aim for a C-section, you know, like they do with many black patients. And I was blunt. I was like they do with many black patients, and they're trying to trap me and get me into a C-section. And I don't think it's fair. And they haven't done everything that they can do. So she put like this like test tube thing in to see how strong my contractions were, realized that they were really weak because, again, they did not keep that stuff going. So she said, what I'll do is I'll let you go up to Pitocin level, I think it was like 6 or 7. She was like, but if your baby's heart rate drops 1 time, both me and you agree that you're gonna go for a C-section. And I was like, yeah, I'll agree for that. So they upped the Pitocin level. They monitored me for an hour. Elena was strong. Her heart never went down. She comes back in. She was like, okay, you're stable here. She said, we're going to move to level 10 or 12. I was like, okay. She was like, if the baby's heart rate drops, I'm telling you, we're going to do C-section. I'm like, okay. Elena, strong, never dropped. I got all the way up to, I think, level 20-something, Pitocin level, a high level of it. Her heart rate never dropped. But because it had been 24 hours since my water broke, they had to do a C-section. So that disappointing feeling like, wow, somebody dropped the ball. A nurse or a doctor or whoever dropped the ball on your laboring process, and now it's forced you into a C-section, is devastating. So I was crying. I'm like, oh my gosh. I was just thinking, how could they do this? Like, oh my God, I cannot believe this is happening. I got the epidural. Like, I was doing everything. I was flipping. I felt good, you know. And so they came, they took me. I did the C-section. I was throwing up the whole time. You feel like you're dying. They put all their strength on you.
They take your hands out like a cross.
They take your hands down.
You can't
Very
move.
traumatic. You can't move. The only thing you can move is your head. Everything's taped down. Again, you can't feel the bottom half because you've already got the epidural. Your anesthesiologist comes with you to surgery, so they're pumping up. You know, when the doctor makes his test incision, they will go ahead and say, "Can you feel that?" You know, type of thing.
Oh my gosh.
And that is crazy.
And on mine, I forgot to say that on my C-section with Eli, I felt it. So they end up giving me Dilaudid, and I think I may have had an allergic reaction because, like, Andrew, like my husband, he thought I went. Like, he's like, I thought you died because he took a big gasp of air and you did not breathe after that. And they were like, he was like, are you breathing? Is she breathing? He was flipping out, but I didn't remember that. But they said, yeah, look on the monitor, her heart is still going.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's a very scary thing. And then because we didn't know what she was, that's another thing. If you don't decide to find out what your baby is until labor, you have to keep reminding the nurse, like, oh, we don't want to know, because they just come in talking, you know, because they're not they're not really looking at the chart. So I had to keep saying, oh, we don't want to find out what the baby is. And so they said they pulled her out, and the lady was like, do you want to see your baby? And talking to Corey. And he was like, yeah. And then the doctor's like, meet your baby girl. And then he let Corey hold her. And then Corey was like, oh, do you want to meet her? And I'm like, get her away from me. I'm like throwing up. I'm like, I don't want to see her right now. I'm trying to focus on not throwing up. And that was that. They sewed me up, and I just remember the other doctor that was on site for the procedure, she was actually crying too, because I had saw her in the practice, and I told her how much I wanted to have a normal labor and everything. And she just was very supportive of the whole thing. I told her like my concerns, how I was feeling. She was like rooting in my corner. So I think she felt sad too to figure out who it was, because they call you in there and then they're like, and you see their face and you're like, oh man, like I know she doesn't want to be in here. And I'm bawling, she's bawling. And then the main doctor's like, come on, let's get this show on the road, you know? So overall, you feel like a disconnect from your baby. And it's not, I don't want to say it's postpartum. I want to say it's the feeling of like not naturally having your baby, that bonding moment that you have. You kind of feel like a disconnect, but people want to just say it's postpartum, but I think it's like that inner feeling, like your whole body feels like you didn't do what it was meant to do or what it was designed to do. And so Sarah Laban, she's a YouTuber. She really walked me through like getting past like all the feelings, because when I was talking to like my mom or my older sister, not Stacy so much because she had kind of had that same feeling too, but when I was talking to them, they couldn't understand what I was saying, because my older sister, she had 2 C-sections. So with her C-section, she's like, oh no, it's a C-section. I went in, I scheduled, like, girl, it was good. I was in and out, you know, where I'm like, devastated. I'm like, what? So I would just say to people, you know, learn as much as you can about the process. Talk to other mothers. Try to get what their experience was. I had pregnant people in my church group, pregnant people, just friends that I would talk to throughout the process. But a lot of people were holding back what actually happened, or, you know, not telling you all the gory details because they don't want to scare you. But the more you learn, the more you hear
your focus,
the more you focus, and you can say, oh no, I remember so-and-so told me that she went through this and this is how she dealt with it. Because you got to think fast on your feet.
You got to be real
You got to know what,
because the nurse is going to come in, they're going to be checking you. They're going to be knowing all the stuff, but they may not communicate that with you. So you got to be like, excuse me, what is my bishop score, knowing like how much your interface efface. You gotta know that stuff.
You gotta know the terminology.
They don't
ask questions, because even if you put a snippet of, oh, okay, what's my bishop score? That lets them know. We can't just tell her.
We can't play with her. She knows what she's talking about.
She knows a little bit more than the average person, and you gotta
especially for us. Like, I think that is like one of the main things. Like, I wish that we could like do a little group session to let Black moms know like the terminologies, because I feel like when we go into the hospital, we're so like focused on baby more so that we're not focused on what's happening around us. So we're kind of like naive to the fact of what to ask and what to be like noticing and looking for. So
it's kind of like your wedding day after you get married, and then you go back home and you're talking about stuff and you're like, oh, that happened, because you're so focused on walking down the aisle looking cute that you're not
looking at all the drama.
Caterer didn't drop the cake, or this person,
the flowers came down.
Yeah,
like,
you get that after the fact, after everybody's talking like, what, that happened? Oh,
when did that happen?
What? Who said that? Like you're like so far into that moment, and you're in your zone, and you're protecting baby, and you're ready for baby, and you're thinking about breastfeeding and if they're gonna latch and all this stuff. Oh, and what's the outfit we're gonna use after the, that kind of stuff, that you're not really focused on the medical part of this major medical situation that's happening, and it's scary.
And I think they take advantage of us in that aspect, because I think that is one of the things that we're definitely concerned. Did you get the car seat? I told you put the car seat. Like, we already fussing, the men's acting crazy. So we're not focused on the medical aspect. And I think a lot of our community is not medically literate when it comes down to the terminologies and procedures and stuff like that, and their different options. That's why I think it was super important, like when it came down to the VBAC, that Tasha was there for me, because she had educated herself and she was telling me, and like basically wanting each one teach one. And that's kind of part of why we wanted to do these videos, so y'all can understand the importance of, okay, you're pregnant, that's all good and dandy, and congratulations, but through your journey, notice these signs and warning signs, especially with doctors. Like, a lot of people don't realize that once you're in the OBGYN, you don't have to stay with that OBGYN. Like,
you can switch.
You can switch. I didn't know that, but that's something that I learned through Tasha, and it's just, that's something that is important, because if you are with a practice that you don't feel like is going with the direction that you want to go in, you definitely have that ability to switch.
And there's a lot of local groups that do things to educate about VBAC. YouTube, I used a lot, like when Stacy was saying, I want to go ahead and do a VBAC, I was YouTubing, I was looking here, looking there, reading, researching. Okay, they're saying, okay, like when the midwife checked her and was like, you on your VBAC calculator, you're at like 0% for a VBAC, or really low VBAC.
It was like 11%. I wasn't even
out of 100. It's
out
like,
of 100.
It's like, 11%. Okay, what factors go into that? She told us the factors, and then she started talking about. Then she started rambling into like talking about the Bishop score, and I was like, Bishop score? And I'm like, okay, tell us more about the Bishop score. So she was ready to just say, oh, your Bishop score's too high, so we're not going to be able to do blah blah blah.
And Tasha was like, what is that? Break that down.
I was like, yeah, break that down. Talk to us more about the Bishop score. So she sat
and
there
she gave us like a crappy explanation of it, and then
she was
Tasha
like, yeah, she was like, and to be honest with you, you're not even that effaced. You're only like 25% effaced. And I was like, well, so I kept holding her feet to the fire. Okay, in order for her to not do the induction, because my thing was trying to avoid her doing all the induction steps, because that's what stalls your labor.
You up.
It can stall your labor. So I was like, well, how much effaced or how much does she? Because basically they were saying for Stacy, when she came in, they were automatically going to do a C-section. They were not going to try to let her do a natural, or not natural, but they weren't going to try to induce her in labor. I said, what point do we have to get her at in order for you guys to induce her labor? And she said, you have to have a Bishop score of X amount. And I was like, okay. I was like, where is she at now? She was like, she's at a 2 or she's at a 1 or whatever. Okay. So I said, Stacy, this is where you're at. Effacement means that we need to thin that cervix down. They have to be facing and moving. The baby has to move into the canal. So we started looking and researching every little thing,
like
to make
exercises,
sure. Yeah, exercises, stretches.
Food.
She started going to yoga and stretching more and all that stuff. So, you know, you just have
and to thin the cervix. I was up in my pineapple intake. I was up in like anything that I could research. I think garlic was one.
Anything natural.
Like anything natural that I could put into my body that was going to help me thin that cervix out. That's what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And then by the time we got to the last appointment where she was going to do the membrane sweep, I think I was like 75% effaced.
Right.
So I was almost there. So I was like, okay.
So that bumped her Bishop score up higher. So I was like, okay, now you said in the last appointment, if we got her in there, that she was gonna, cause see, what I don't want y'all to do is she gets there and then y'all just try to get her in surgery. And so, I mean, my personal win in this situation is that she was able to do the VBAC. Now I'm totally scared. To be honest with you, I don't know if I would try again. I told my mom the only way I would do it is try to have it VBAC, try to have it natural, but it is very frightening when you start thinking about all the things that could pop up to go wrong. So that was my win when she actually got one. It was a little bit, it was like, yeah, you know, we did it, you know, type of thing.
And I want her to go for one. I'm like, okay, God, just like give her some comfort in her mind to say it'll be okay. Because I feel like we definitely could try it because now we know. Now we're educated.
We know more now.
And, you know, we got that doula power. We know where to take her. We know, you know, she didn't gave me that cocktail. So there's all types of stuff that we can try now.
Right.
But we're going to leave it up to her because it's her body. So she knows what she wants to do. Mm-hmm. But definitely from all of that, I would say educate.
Yes, that's the key. That's the key, guys. And especially for African American women, which have the highest rate of mortality during childbirth. Mm-hmm. You want to know exactly what's going on. Ask your friends, talk to your mom about how her labor went. Just find out as much information as you
about
can
your
possible.
history too, about your family history,
about your family history as well,
and make sure you know what every medications that they're giving you, because some of the medications are just to make you comfortable, not to really help you in labor, and some of the comfortable medicines can make you have a reaction where it slows your process down.
Right.
So you just gotta be very educated going into labor. I mean, I know that sounds crazy because you think, well, I'm going to this hospital, these are people trained and doing that. Well, for Black women, we all know that either we're on Medicaid, or B, we're not on Medicaid, but we also know that they push to have C-sections because it's a more payout than a natural birth. Mm-hmm. So if you keep that in mind and just
be on guard. When you go in there, don't be in there relaxing like, oh, I'm just going to have my baby. Everything's going to be fine. Lay in bed, watching the nurse, watching TV. Like, be actively involved. Every time they come in, have a question for them.
Yeah.
Hey, how's my baby doing?
Yeah.
Has their heart rate dropped? Do I need to switch? You know, start switching yourself. Move on this side. Hey, can you switch me? I want to go on this side. The purpose of that is because when you have an epidural, your baby doesn't do that motion as much when you're contracting to move down in the canal in the birthing position. So it goes slower. They may get stuck and can't get themselves out. So by flipping, you're helping that.
It's like an ocean.
Right. So just all those little things. If you guys have any questions or concerns, please comment below. We would love to help you and give you the resources. Like I said, we can link some different things. And until next time.
Oh, and then also just a side note, when you're in the doctor's office, take a journal. Like, make sure you have a journal. Right. But I think we're gonna have another video to tell y'all like what to do, like tips. Yeah. We'll be back.
All right, see ya.